indicates the idea of bittul. Through the level of bittul, that's how we reach the tzmicha shaloi ba'erech. And this is the same thing that Malchus is called. Malchus is Ares Batolos, and the Yidden are considered like being planted in the ground. So these are all indications of why Yidden are also likened to Reishis Tfuose of the Eibishter, because they are also likened to the Eretz Chayfetz. It's all through the bittul and through the Kabbalah's oil, which is Reishis, Avoid Vikar V'Sharsha, they reach that highest, most level of the tzmicha in a way that's above and beyond. Even higher, same thing we said about the regel, the sholosh regalim, that the Yom Tovim are called the regel, that through that we reach to Moed and Besimcha, and that's through regel, which is also Kabbalah's oil, and the same thing Zoyrim Bedima, which is Kabbalah's oil, planting with tears. That's how we reach the idea of Simcha, which is even higher than the head, higher than Seichel, higher than all the levels that it was at before. So now he's going to continue in Ois Dalid, that the differences, he's going to point out, even though we mentioned it in very short, and we said that later on we'd elaborate upon it, the differences between the grain of the grains, Tavua, versus Peiris Ha'ilon, fruits of the tree. So line 11, Ois Dalid, page 5. In addition to the general advantage and quality of growth that comes about through planting, that's to be found both in grain and crops and both in the fruits of the tree. There's a special advantage in the fruits of the tree over grain. This is also the general difference between Sukkot, which is called the Yom Tov of gathering. It's connected both with gathering in the all the things from the silo and all the things that are out in the field, whether it's wine, whether it's oil, whether it's grapes, fruits. In other words, all the things that are beyond just grains. In comparison to the Yom Tov Pesach and Shavuos, that are connected with grains. That's the idea of the Gancha, your crops, which is on Pesach we said is the time of the harvest of barley, and on Shavuos the time of the harvest of wheat. So that is the difference. These two Yom Tovim, Sukkot is including peiros, fruits, and Pesach and Shavuos is primarily and only about the grain. It's a general difference between sowing that's connected with grain versus planting that has to do with a tree. What's the difference between them? Behind the scenes. Before Baruch Sefer Vayikra explained that length of the Torah at the end of the Sefer Vayikra. The growth that comes about through the sowing of grain is only in such a way, as I mentioned in passing before, it's quantitatively more. Hainu, this means, we plant one kernel of wheat, or one kernel of barley, that through that grow up many, many stalks, that in each one of those stalks there are multiple seeds, multiple kernels. So it's primarily an increase in quantity, more from one. It's not so much a difference in quality as we will explain takes place by the fruits of the tree. Parenthetically, the Rebbe is not going to say in the brackets that also there's a certain qualitative change as well that takes place, even though it might not be quite visible to the eye. So he says in the brackets on line 24, Makal Makim still and all. Since the growth comes about specifically through the prefacing of the kernel of wheat or the kernel of barley has to dissolve, has to rot away in the ground, but in such a way, like we've mentioned a few times, that their entire existence ceases to be. This dissolution of the kernel of wheat or barley, it awakens the power of growth, the energy, the fact that in the ground itself there's a power of growth. To make grow many stalks of wheat and barley. Though the outcome is only an amount in it's only much more in quantity, not in quality. There's no difference in the barley that grows up from one kernel of barley, or the wheat that grows from one kernel of wheat, in comparison to that original kernel. But still in all, there's still a novelty in it, and there's a new being because it came out of nowhere. Since the greater increase quantitatively is coming only through the previous quantity. We're saying it's an increase in quantity, so there's a smaller quantity and a bigger quantity. So the previous quantity became totally dissolved, completely nullified. So to a certain degree, there is also a certain aspect of change from quality, that because now it became nothing, so it's changed even qualitatively. But in general, what's visible is that you have one seed, one kernel of wheat turning into many kernels. So that's mainly a quantitative increase. After the brackets, line 30, but the advantage of planting a fruit tree, through the planting of the fruit tree becomes an increase and a whole new quality of an increase. Through planting a seed that it has no flavor to it, and it's not something that a human being consumes. When we're coming to the kernel of wheat and the kernel of barley that was planted in the ground, theoretically, you could have used that same kernel of barley and kernel of wheat and cooked it, baked it, ground it, etc., and used it for food. So it's just as much food as the kernels of wheat and barley that are going to grow from it. But by a fruit tree, it's not that way. The seeds are something that are not able to be consumed. They have no taste to it. And from that tasteless, foodless item, grows from it a tree that is bearing fruit, that these fruit from the seed, which was tasteless and would not be able to be consumed food, now grows fruit, which is human food. Top of page Yud. In addition to that, what else is a qualitative difference? That the fruit of the tree is ready for human consumption immediately. As soon as it's ripe, you could eat it. You could pick it and eat it. Without the need for the categories of the 39 malachas that you need concerning grain. It doesn't mean that you need all the 39 malachas, but since the Chazal say that when he enumerates in the Mishnah the 39 malachas, he goes according to Sidura de Pas Nokat. He's going in the order of what it takes to prepare bread. So the initial malachas of the 39 malachas are about plowing and about sowing and about threshing and bundling, all the different things have to do, grinding, etc., etc. So he calls it the 39 malachas, even though again it's not literally 39 malachas. Sharei, line 3, even after the growth of the grain. He's carrying his bundles. So he has already his bundles together. He's already carrying it. Even then, even after the threshing and the carrying the bundles and etc., it's still not ready for human consumption. Chazal say, a person brings wheat into the house. Chitin kaises, does he chew wheat as it is? Bitmiyah, the Gemara says it. Rather, the woman has to go ahead and prepare it. There's a need for many labors until it is ready for human consumption. Like it's explained over there in Likkutei Torah that he's quoting from initially, for the sake of the growth of the fruit tree, there's a difference between fruit tree growth versus the growth, again, before it's ready, the growth of a fruit tree versus the growth of the grains. Yesh amdam tzorech b'shehus man harbe yoser mit asher b'shvil tzmich satvu. True, there is a need in much more delay in the growth of a kernel of a seed planted in the ground to make a fruit tree versus what it takes for wheat to grow. A fruit tree can take many years. The Gemara even brings an example that there's a certain type of date palm that takes 70 years to grow. There's a whole story with Chanya Magel about this in the Gemara. Carob trees is supposed to take an immense amount of time, etc., etc. And he says in the parentheses, why is that so? Why does it take a kernel of wheat to be able to bring out stalks of wheat takes a short time relative to how much time it takes from a fruit seed to bring a fruit-bearing tree? It's connected to what we mentioned before, that there's a very great distance. It's a qualitative difference between the seed of a fruit that turns into a tree, a fruit tree, versus the fruits that grow out of it, as opposed to the distance is not so far between a kernel of wheat and the wheat stalks that happen afterwards. So it's a much quicker process of that transition. But on the other hand, the Rebbe says in line 12, there is that quality that the fruit trees are immediately ready for human consumption. So this is another distinction between the fruit trees and the grains, that not only is the qualitative difference in the fact that you're going from something that is inedible to something edible versus the grains. You are starting from something edible and you're concluding with something edible. But in addition to that, you are going from something that's inedible to something that's edible immediately in a fruit tree, versus when you have the grains, the wheat and the barley, even once it's ready, even once you pick it, there are still many steps that you have to go through to make it be edible. So he goes on in line 14, there's he adds, there's another advantage and quality that's incomparable in the fruits of the tree versus the grains of like wheat and barley, etc. Specifically, in the fruits do we associate with the idea of delight and pleasure. The idea of wheat, barley, these are called staples. They're not eaten for enjoyment and pleasure. These are basic survival foods. The general idea of delight is completely above all the entire order and the value of the levels beneath it. The power of delight, whether we're talking about within the person himself, the koyach hatainuk, It's beyond midas, it's beyond seichel, it's beyond the rotzen even, which is a koyach makif. As well as in the tainug above, Hashem's level of tainug, the level of atik, is pnimius hakeser, that's beyond all the spheres below it, even beyond the level of arachamp in chatzainis hakeser. So therefore, the fruit reeds that are made for the light have this great quality of tainug. For that reason, the level of tainug is called loidak makif stam, not just the ordinary makif, ala makif harochik, but a distant makif, like we spoke about at length, the difference in a distant makif and a close makif in the previous Mamorim of Basel Lagani this year. And the Alter Rebbe explains over there the similarity of this concept of tainug versus the staple of a diet in the service of the neshamas. That's the difference in the service of the neshama, the way it's connected with the reward and delight of the lower Gan Eden, or with the reward and delight of the upper level of Gan Eden. The Afshe Gan Eden b'chlal in a tainug, though Gan Eden in general is the idea of the light. There is in the level of Gan Eden a level that's called a lower Gan Eden. And between the lower level of Gan Eden, there's such a distance and such a chasm between them that you need to first nullify the vision and the impression that he had from the lower Gan Eden, to such a degree, there's this pillar that transports, if you will, the neshamas from the lower Gan Eden to the higher Gan Eden, that this pillar causes that losing of the image of the lower Gan Eden before he goes up into the higher Gan Eden. Bedugmas bittel hacheze the high alma. This is similar to what we have, the nullification of the image of this world before one can appreciate Gan Eden. Va'omich ben ha'olam Gan Eden ha'elyon al Gan Eden b'chlal, and the pillar between this world and Gan Eden in general. It's like it's explained in many places. This shows about how distant the upper level of Gan Eden is from the lower level of Gan Eden, that it needs that same transitioning and that same being mevatel, the level of the lower level of Gan Eden before you could reach the higher level of Gan Eden, similar to how you have to be mevatel, the image of this world, from the higher worlds, from the worlds of Gan Eden. This is also understood. From this we can understand the idea of the great quality and advantage of the fruits of the tree that come through planting, that has the idea of delight and enjoyment, and that is the Makifa Elyon, similar the Makva Rochik, similar to the Gan Eden Elyon being completely removed. So this idea of the enjoyment and the delight, he's also going to connect with the specialness of the Yom Tov of Sukkot, that we said the Yom Tov of Sukkot has to do with, specifically with the fruits of the tree, more so than the other two Yom Tovim that are mainly about the grains of the field. So he says in line 4, page Aleph, the main time of rejoicing in the Yom Tovim is in the Yom Tov Sukkot. The Yom Tov Sukkot specifically is called the time of our Simcha, though all three Yom Tovim are called Moedim LaSimcha, but which one is called the time of our Simcha, as opposed to Pesach, that's called the time of our freedom, Shavuos is called the time of Kabbalah Satorah, Ukidisa B'Yalk Shemaini, like it's brought down Yalk Shemaini. Pesach, you don't even find anywhere in the Torah that's written even once Simcha in connection with the Yom Tov of Pesach. So how do we know Bechlal that on Pesach you have to be joyous? So he says, you have to derive the idea of joy on Pesach from other Yom Tovim by means of how they derive the different halachas. Ubat says when it comes to Shavuos, Ein Kosoval Simcha Achas, it only says once the idea of joy. But Sukkos, that both the grain and the fruits of the tree are already brought in, that's what Chaga Asif, they're gathered. Kos of Shalish Smachas, it says 3 times the idea of Simcha. So now we're going to see the connection and tie it all up, the connection between the beginning of the Mishnah of the 4 Rosh Hashanahs and the end of the Mishnah. Ois Hey, line 12. This is what it says, that there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Rosh Hashanah L'Mlachim L'Regalim, there's the Rosh Hashanah for kings and for the Yom Tovim of the pilgrimage festivals, Ad Rosh Hashanah L'Ila, until it concludes the Mishnah with Rosh Hashanah for the tree. And we said the beginning, Noach Cholasim B'Seifon, in addition to the fact that all Rosh Hashanahs are under the same name, Rosh Hashanah, are connected specifically, there's even more connection between the beginning and the end is staked out in the beginning, etc. Hainu Sheklolis in Natsmicha, Shayidei Hazriya, Shanimrud Verashan L'Mlachim Regalim, the general idea of the growth that comes about through planting, that's hinted in Rosh Hashanah for the kings and for the Yom Tovim, because we said the regel that has to do with Tvua, the regalim, and the Melech is the idea of the Malchus, the level of the earth in which it's planted, and the Yerida and so on, and the level of bittul of a king. That's all about the planting. Kosher and Rosh Hashanah Elon is connected with the head of the year for trees. Which is the 15th of Shvat. On the 15th of Shvat, the moon is full. This is still in the middle of the what's called Kufas Tevis, is the Chazal's terminology for winter. And we're then it's the strength, it's the powerful cold and winter. The main idea of the tree, that the sap goes into the bark, etc. That's when it happens. That's the main thing of the tree happens then. On Rosh Hashanah, this is found concealed and only in a state of potential. From this comes about afterwards concerning the Yom Tovim, the state and situation of the fruits of the tree inside. That's in the Yom Tov of gathering. Then they will come in a way of celebration. They will return. They will have the simcha. They will come in song. The idea of the head of the year for the tree in the service of a person to Hashem, that's the idea of Torah study. Like it's brought down in Gemara, what it says, that the man is the tree of the field. The Gemara asks, is then a man a tree of the field? Since the pasuk goes on to say, don't cut it down because you eat from it. So the same thing, a Talmud Chacham that studies Torah, you're eating his fruit. Im Talmud Chacham hagenhu, if he's a worthy Talmud Chacham, memenu toichel, you shall eat from him. Makish adam eitz asadi compares a person to the tree of the field. Ma eitz asadi, just like the tree of the field. Im eitz maichel hu memenu toichel cholu, if it's a fruit tree, so then you eat from it, you can't chop it down. So to him, if he's a worthy Talmud Chacham, you should eat from him, meaning study from him. This means when a Talmud Chacham studies Torah in the appropriate manner, then he's similar to a fruit tree. Elon is a tree that gives forth fruit, that we eat of its fruits. Top of the last page. In addition to the general idea that we said above, That's appropriate for every single Jew in every place in all generations. There's another idea on the 15th of Shvat that's connected with spreading Yiddishkeit and spreading the wellspring. So with the Reinu Zevim Yuchad, especially in this generation. Because on the 15th of Shvat, that's when the moon is full of the month, that the 10th in it, which the 10th is holy, Yom Elul, and you see the Reinu, it's the yard site of the leader of our generation. This is understood. That the perfection and completion of all the matters of the month, including the 10th of the month, meaning Yud Shvat, is in the 15th of it. And the corresponding to the directives and the study of these days, throughout our actions and service throughout the time of Golus, speeds up even more the state of this moon being in the state of fullness, which means when Mashiach will come, till the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun, like it says about Mashiach's times, and the light of the sun will be 7 times as much, like it's explained in the Torah, the specific levels about this concerning the reward, and Ketzel, above to no end. Because of Mamish, soon Mamish, the Mashiach Tzedkenu, and the true and complete Geula through Mashiach.